As a night delivery driver, you see all kinds of things. The lonely streets of New York have an eerie stillness that's quite different from their daytime bustle. One particular night, the city felt stranger than usual, a sensation that crawled up my spine and settled in the pit of my stomach. Had a late-night delivery for a place I'd never been before, an old apartment building on the outskirts of town. The request came in at 2 a.m., which was unusual but not unheard of. My GPS led me through winding streets and past dimly lit alleys until I reached the address. The building loomed ahead, its facade dark and imposing. The only light came from a flickering street lamp casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. I parked my van and grabbed the package, a small box wrapped in brown paper and twine. There was no return address. I approached the building, noting how silent it was. No cars drove by, no voices could be heard. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The front door creaking as I pushed it open. The lobby was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, its light casting eerie shadows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty space. There was no answer. A chill ran through me, but I shrugged it off and walked towards the elevator. The buttons were grimy, and I pressed the one for the 5th floor. The elevator groaned to life, shuddering as it ascended. The doors opened. I stepped out into a dark hallway. The air was thick with dust and a faint, musty odor. I checked the address again, apartment 503. As I walked down the corridor, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was no one there. Reaching the door, I knocked. There was no answer. I knocked. Again, harder this time. Still nothing. I was about to leave the package at the doorstep when I heard a faint rustling from inside. I leaned in, listening closely. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and I found myself staring into darkness. I took a step back, heart racing. "Hello, delivery for apartment 503. A shadowy figure emerged, moving slowly towards me. As it stepped into the dim light of the hallway, I saw an elderly man, his eyes wide and unblinking. His clothes were tattered, and his skin had a sickly pallor. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He reached out with a trembling hand and took the package from me, his fingers brushing against mine, sending a jolt of cold through my body. "Have a good night," I said, my voice shaky. He didn't respond, just stood there, staring at me. I turned and hurried back to the elevator, eager to leave the building, not A's. I reached the lobby. I heard the door to apartment 503 slam shut. The sound echoed through the empty halls, making my skin crawl. I rushed outside, breathing a sigh of relief as I stepped into the fresh air. I got into my van and drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror. The building stood silent and dark, and I couldn't shake the image of the old man from my mind. Something about him had unsettled me deeply. I tried to put the experience behind me, but the feeling of unease lingered. The next night, I had another delivery in the same area. As I drove past the building, I glanced at it again. To my shock, the 5th floor window was lit, and I could see the silhouette of the old man watching me. A shiver ran down my spine, and I sped up, eager to get away. For the next few nights, I couldn't stop thinking about that building and the old man. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something was off. I decided to do some digging. I asked around, talking to other delivery drivers and locals. They told me that the building had been abandoned for years. No one lived there. The more I heard, the more I felt a sense of dread. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back to the building, determined to find out the truth. I parked my van and walked towards the entrance, the same chill crawling up my spine. The door was still ajar, just as I had left it. I stepped inside, the lobby eerily silent. I made my way to the elevator, but this time it didn't work. I had to take the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. Reaching the 5th floor, I walked down the dark hallway to apartment 503. The door was closed, and I hesitated before knocking. There was no answer. I turned the knob, and to my surprise, the door swung open. Inside, the apartment was dark and cold. The furniture was covered in dust, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. The package I had delivered was sitting on a table, unopened. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized the old man was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, heart pounding. The room grew colder, and I could feel a presence, something malevolent and ancient. I backed away, trying to find a way out. The shadows seemed to move, closing in on me. I stumbled, my hands brushing against something cold and metal. It was an old lantern. I lit it, the flame flickering weakly, casting a small circle of light. In the dim glow, I saw the old man standing in the corner, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He moved towards me, his expression twisted with rage. "You shouldn't have come back," he hissed, his voice echoing through the room. I turned and ran, the lantern swinging wildly in my hand. The shadows seemed to reach out, trying to pull me back. I burst through the door, racing down the hallway and stairs, not stopping until I was outside. I didn't look back as I drove away. The image of the old man's glowing eyes burned into my memory. I never returned to that building, and I warned other drivers to stay away. To this day, I don't know what I encountered in apartment 503. Some nights, when I'm out on a delivery, I feel a chill in the air and remember the old man's warning. There are things in this city, ancient and malevolent, that are best left undisturbed. After that night, I found it hard to shake the memories of the encounter. Every time I drove past the area, I couldn't resist stealing a glance at the building. It stood there, silent and ominous, a dark blot on the otherwise bustling neighborhood. Particularly cold night, I had another late delivery, not too far from the same building. As I was driving, my van's radio started to act up, the static growing louder until it was almost deafening. I reached over to adjust the dial, but nothing seemed to work. The noise only stopped when I turned the radio off. The streets were unusually empty, and the familiar sense of unease crept over me. The address I was heading to was only a few blocks away from that cursed building. I couldn't help but feel a pull towards it, an inexplicable urge to confront whatever was lurking there. When I reached my destination, I delivered the package quickly, eager to get back to my van. But as I turned to leave, I saw a figure standing at the end of the street, barely illuminated by a distant street lamp. It was the old man from apartment 503, watching me with those same unblinking eyes. A chill ran down my spine, and I hurried back to my van, my mind racing. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, but deep down, I knew there was something more to it. I had to know the truth. Against my better judgment, I found myself driving back to the building. I parked a little way down the street, the engine ticking as it cooled. The building loomed ahead, its windows dark and foreboding. I took a deep breath and got out, steeling myself for what I might find. The front door was still ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. The lobby looked the same as before, but the air felt heavier, more oppressive. I made my way to the stairs, the elevator still out of order. Each step echoed in the silence, amplifying my growing fear. Reaching the 5th floor, I walked down the hallway, my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. The door to apartment 503 was slightly open, just enough to show that someone had been there recently. I hesitated, but the same urge drove me forward. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was even colder than before, and the lantern I had left behind was gone. I moved cautiously, scanning the room with my flashlight. The package I had delivered still sat on the table, untouched and gathering dust. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The room seemed to close in on me, the shadows shifting and twisting. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It was a low, guttural sound, like something not quite human. I backed away, my flashlight flickering as if something was draining its power. The whispering turned into a growl, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned, and there he was, the old man, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light, his expression one of pure malice. "You should have stayed away," he rasped, his voice echoing in the dark. The shadows around him seemed to move, reaching out towards me. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The shadows enveloped the room, and the old man advanced, his eyes burning brighter. I could feel the temperature drop, my breath visible in the freezing air. Desperation took over, and I swung my flashlight at him. It passed through his form as if he were made of smoke. The growling grew louder, filling my ears and drowning out my thoughts. I was trapped, alone, with no escape. Just when I thought it was over, the package on the table began to shake. The twine unraveled, and the paper fell away, revealing a small, ornate box. It opened on its own, and a blinding light burst forth, dispelling the shadows. The old man recoiled, his form flickering. The growling ceased, replaced by a high-pitched wail. The light grew brighter, pushing him back, and the shadows retreated to the corners of the room. Seizing the opportunity, I rushed towards the door, yanking it open and stumbling into the hallway. The wail followed me, echoing through the building as I fled down the stairs and out into the night. I didn't stop running until I was back in my van, panting and drenched in cold sweat. I drove away, not daring to look back. The wailing faded into the distance, but the memory of that night stayed with me. I never took another delivery in that area again, and I warned others to avoid it at all costs. To this day, I don't know what was in that apartment or what the old man wanted, but I do know one thing: some places are best left undisturbed, and some secrets are meant to stay buried.